It is my great pleasure to present the Rav who was chosen, and the selection was a very, very difficult one, to give the special Dvar Torah in his behalf, in behalf of his fellow Misvachim, Harav Ari Berman.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Chalaf. Rishus Rosh HaYeshiva Unesiah Harav Lam, Rishus Morai V'Rabosai Roshei U'Menahalei HaYeshiva, fellow Musmachim, honored guests, and of course my dear parents, Avi Mori V'Imi Morasi. I first entered this auditorium when I was 13 years old, as a freshman of the Marcia Stern Talmudic Academy. And now, more than 15 years later, after graduating from Yeshiva's high school, its college, its graduate school for Jewish studies, and its Hasemikhah program, I stand here today as a representative of my Hasemikhah class. And although I know that as a representative of the next generation of Rabbanim, it would be appropriate for me to focus on the future, I cannot help but reflect on the past, on my years at Yeshiva, and specifically my years as a Talmid of Yeshiva's Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan. One of the mitzvos that is very fitting to speak about at a Chag Hasemikhah, and is undoubtedly the most important mitzvah in the Torah for my chaverim and myself today, as we celebrate becoming Rabbanim, is the mitzvah of Kavod Harav. We know there's a mitzvah of Kavod Harav, but why is there a mitzvah of Kavod Harav? What is the source for this mitzvah? The Rambam deals with this issue in the 5th and 6th prakim of his Hilchos Talmud Torah. And as Rav Elvel Soloveitchik, the Brisker Rav, develops in the Sefer on the Rambam thinks that in fact there are two mitzvos of Kavod Harav. One is a general mitzvah, that there's a mitzvah to respect all Talmidei Chachamim. And this mitzvah stems from a pasuk. The Torah says, V'hadarta p'nei zakein. You should treat with hiddur, with honor, a zakein. Who is a zakein, asks Chazal? A zakein b'chachma. That there's a general mitzvah to treat Talmidei Chachamim with hiddur, with honor. And then there's a second mitzvah of Kavod Harav, which is an obligation to show respect to a specific Rebbe, one's Rav Muvhak, the person who has taught him Rov Chachmaso, most of his Torah knowledge. That over and above the expression of hiddur that one must show to a Talmud Chacham, there's an extra level of kavod that one must display to his Rav Muvhak. So for example, while it is a mitzvah to stand in the presence of a Talmud Chacham when he is Dalet Amos, when he is 4 Amos away, as that is an expression of hiddur, that when it comes to a Rav Muvhak, one must stand once the Rebbe enters into eyesight, since there's an extra obligation to express a greater display of kavod. And what is interesting about the second mitzvah to a Rav Muvhak is its source. As opposed to a general Talmud Chacham, there is no pasuk that directly relates to a Rav Muvhak. What then is the source for this mitzvah? So in truth, this is perhaps a machlokas rishonim. But the Rambam writes in the beginning of the 5th parak of Hilchos Talmud Torah that the reason for this extra level of kibud is that the Rav Muvhak is likened to a parent. Kishem sha'adam mitzuva b'chvod ava v'yiraso, kachu chaya b'chvod rabo v'yiraso yaser me'aviv. That just as a person is commanded to respect and revere his father, so too is he commanded to honor and revere his Rebbe, and even yaser me'aviv. That there is a kal v'chomer, that if one must treat his parents in a certain way, because of all that they have done for him, l'chai olam hazeh, then certainly one must treat his Rav Muvhak in that way, for he has brought him l'chai olam haba. that the reason, the source for respecting the Rav Muvak in that greater fashion is because the Rav Muvak is likened to a parent. And in fact, if one compares the halachos of how one is supposed to treat his parents with how one is supposed to treat his Rebbe, one can note that they share many of the same dinim, for they are parallel concepts. They share the same source. But in truth, this comparison of a Rebbe to a parent is not limited to how a Talmud treats his Rebbe, but also affects how a Rebbe treats his Talmud. The Rambam writes at the end of Parakeh, "V'tzarech adam lehizar b'talmidav ula'ahavam," that a Rebbe needs to take care of his students and to love them. Shehem habanim, hamahanim li'olam hazeh v'la'olam haba. For they are his children. They bring him pleasure in this world and in the world to come. This parental model characterizes the tone and nature of the Rebbe-Talmud relationship, both in how the Rebbe acts towards the Talmud and how the Talmud acts towards the Rebbe. Perhaps this spirit is best captured by the rabbinic drasha on the pasuk V'shinamtam levanecha. Literally, V'shinamtam levanecha means you should teach your children. But Chazal understand that who are banecha? Banecha elu talmidecha. That the bond between a Rebbe and Talmud is parallel to the bond between a parent and child. That the Talmud is called a ben, for he has that relationship with his Rebbe. V'shinamtam lebanecha, banecha elu talmidecha. As I stand here today and reflect on my years at Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, one of the main elements that stands out in my mind, and I am sure in the minds of my fellow Musmachim, is the kesher between the Rebbeim and the Talmidim, and how this bond is very much modeled after the spirits expressed by the Rambam. Of course, the relationship is built primarily around the Torah being taught and the Torah being learned. But in truth, it is much more than that. For the Rebbeim here do not act as aloof academics or remote rabbis, but treat us, their Talmidim, with care and devotion. The relationship between Rebbe and Talmud far transcends the classroom, far transcends the specific Masechta studied in the yeshiva, and even far transcends the period that the Talmud studies in the yeshiva. It concerns itself with all areas of the Talmud's life, at all times of the Talmud's life. Personal problems, hashkafic questions, halachic queries, all come to the Rebbe, and all are treated with an almost parental concern. And it's not just true for the Magidei Shir, but I have personally felt the spirit, this care, concern, and devotion from all parts of our yeshiva, from the mashgiach and his assistant, to the office of REITs, to the office of the Communal Services Division, to the office of the Rosh Hashiva, and President himself. V'shinamtam lebanecha, banecha elu talmidecha. And while it is true, as we mentioned before, that we are obligated to display kavod and yira to our Rabbeim every day of the year, specifically today at our Chag Hasemikhah, it is especially appropriate for us, the Talmidim, to express our kavod and our thanks. For if we stand tall today at our Chag Hasemikhah, it is because we are standing on the shoulders of giants. And so I would like to take this moment as a representative of the past 4 Smicha classes to express our tremendous debt of gratitude to the Menahalei and Roshei Yeshiva of our yeshiva, to take this moment and to say thank you. But while indeed it is a tremendous debt that we owe, interestingly enough, it is one that could readily be repaid. After studying many years in the main campus under Mori Rabbi of Michael Rosenzweig, I had the opportunity to study in the Gurs Koller in Yerushalayim under Mori Rabbi of Aaron Lichtenstein. And I remember one year when Rav Lichtenstein invited the Chavrei Kollel to his sukkah on Chol HaMoed, that one of the members of the Kollel posed to him the following question. He said he had a very serious problem. He knows, of course, of the pasuk, V'sonei matanos yichya, and all the Gemaras that reflect this principle, that one should not be the type of person who continuously receives and accepts presents. But over the past year, he had been faced with a dilemma, because his in-laws were continually giving him presents. First, they bought him a refrigerator. They recently just bought him a car. Now they were looking to buy him an apartment in Israel. He had a very serious problem. Rahman al-Islam lo aleinu. He had a very serious problem. What could he possibly do? Rav Lichtenstein answered that his assumption was incorrect. The pasuk of Vasonei matanos yichya, he said, applied to peers and to friends. For friends have a give-and-take relationship. Each side gives and takes. And so in that relationship, if one is just on the receiving side, then there is an imbalance. But the relationship between parent and child is very different. As I know very well from my own parents and in-laws, this is a relationship in which the parent just gives and gives to the child. And there is no way for the child to possibly give back to the parent that which was given to him. As a result, the pasuk of Vasonei matanos yichya does not apply to parents and children. How then does one give back to his parents, Rav Lichtenstein asked? By taking the gifts that the parents gave to him and passing them down to the next generation. By taking all of the time and energy and love that the parents put into him and giving that over to the next generation. That is how one gives back to one's parents. V'shinamtam levanecha, banecha elu talmidecha. In light of the parental parallel we mentioned before, I would like to suggest that the same is true for a Rebbe and his Talmud. The way we can repay our tremendous debt of Akaras Hatov to our Rebbeim and to this yeshiva is by taking all of the gifts that they have given us, all of the knowledge, all of the skills, all of the Torah, and transmitting them to the next generation. For that is why we chose to be Rabbanim in the first place, to lead Orthodoxy into the next century, to face the challenges of the future in the spirit of the Masorah from our past, to ensure the continuity of our tradition, to enable it to grow and to flourish. This is how we will give back to our yeshiva, and this is how we will give to our communities. I first entered this auditorium as a freshman in MTA. Now, more than 15 years later, I am proud to stand here today with all my chaverim as a musmach of Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan. Thank you.